Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Brown Bag Lunch. It's one of our series of meetings on innovation methodologies, and we get to talk to interesting speakers from different parts of the development world. And today we're particularly fortunate to also have someone like to have somebody who's come from the private sector as well to give us a little bit of an insight into measurement around social impact. So thank you very much, Ashley, for being here with us today. A good turnout, so I take it you're not too sick yet of our invitation, and it's great to have you. Before we maybe let Benjamin take us very quickly through the objective of the session, maybe we can go around the table so Ashley, you get a sense of who we have. We have a number of people from UNDP as well as outside. Again, my name is Bernard. I'm with the Innovation and Knowledge Management Unit, and we run the Innovation Facility, which is a seed funding facility to promote innovation within our programs in UNDP. So, sir.
Sure, I'm Jordi Torrent. I'm from United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. I work on media and information literacy.
Thank you.
My name is Frances Wood. I'm a Dickon Secondi working with UNDP on results reporting and development impact curriculum.
Astra Bedini with the Human Development Report Office.
I am also Julia, also in Unit Regulation.
Margarita, Sustainable Development Cluster.
Also coming for specification.
Casper Thornton, Sustainable Development Cluster, working on extractive industries and a little bit of private sector engagement.
Hi, I'm Ashley Speyer from our
Romulo Gisoni, Development Impact Group.
I'm a student from UNDP.
Paul Vanderkar, I'm at UNDP Communications.
Caroline Strategic Policy.
Yeah, HR learning UNDP.
I'm Meghna, I'm an intern with HR Learning, HR UNDP.
James Benner with the Climate Change Mitigation Group.
I'm Yoshi, I'm a student in Columbia University. I'm mobility one day
Cassie Flynn, Climate Change Advisor.
Dinicia Arigato, Development Impact.
Katrina in Climate Change, UNDP Climate Change Cluster, and responsible for communications and external communications.
Daniel Neuerks, a research consultant on migration and displacement at the Sustainable Development Cluster.
I'm Lucy Richardson from the Sustainable Development Cluster. I work in the Livelihoods and Economic Recovery team.
Hi, my name is Jihan Touil. I'm with the CDT Cluster, Climate and Disaster, but I'm originally from the country office in Tunisia. I'm here in the data assignment.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Ben. I work in the innovation team of the Development Impact Group.
Hi, and I am Janine, working in the knowledge management team of the Development Impact Group.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Hi, everyone online. We usually have a streaming via Google Hangout. Great that you're all here. Just in a nutshell, our innovation facility started in 2014. What we do is we support country office teams, but also teams in regional hubs and headquarters to look at wicked problems and how can we innovate around it. What can we do to find solutions to those problems, but also take opportunities for innovation. And of course, for us, it's about making a difference for the people affected by development challenges, not throwing a cell phone in the mix or having a website. So it's really about a demonstrated change in people's lives, but how do we demonstrate that? We have very exciting initiatives going on, and what we emphasize are quick learning loops, testing assumptions, testing a hypothesis, and finding out really quickly if there's merit, for example, launching a system to report corruption via a simple SMS system. If there's a merit in using unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, for mine clearance in Colombia, or for applying behavioral insights to improve public health in Moldova. The latter example is one of the few, for example, where we worked with the Behavioral Insights team in the UK, initiated one of the first randomized control trials within UNDP's global portfolio. We'll hear more about randomized control trials and other impact assessment methods from Ashley in a second, but I want to underline we are really about this impact. We are always eager and curious to learn from outside players and within the house, what can we do to see if our innovations work? But not only our innovations, but our work as UNDP. And not so much focusing on, as we do it traditionally, the activities that we put in a project document with very linear planning for multiple years, but on the change we want to see. In innovation, we are really not so much after the solutions, the app, the cell phone, but the change we want to achieve. And if we have to drop the app in between and go another route, we do it. That's innovation, to iterate, but being focused on the impact. That's why we invited Ashley, because Acumen is one of our partners we want to learn from. We have Pierre here from the learning team in human resources. We were so happy to see that UNDP also partnered with Acumen and IDEO. We have a leadership development program going on. Is anyone currently in the first or second cohort of that LDP?
Excellent.
And part of this leadership development program is a human-centered design course with Acumen, actually. Human-centered design, a discipline that focuses very much on understanding the problem much better, thinking of testable solutions with the people affected, and then trying things out, including the practice of prototyping. If you think of a new process, you prototype it, and you play it to future users right away. It can save you 100 meetings. And this quick learning, so that's part of our leadership course, trying with human resources to change the way we do business as UNDP, together with Acumen. But now I'll hand over to Ashley. Ashley, thanks so much for being here. And
Thank you.
take it away.
Great. Hi, everyone. I think I'm going to stand just because there's so many of you. But yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you guys for having me. So I've been at Acumen now for about 2.5 years working on the impact team. And just, is everyone familiar with Acumen in a nutshell and kind of what we do? Yeah? Okay, great.
No.
Why don't you give us a
Okay. Oh, no one's going to say
elevator
that.
pitch for Acumen.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect. So let me just start there. Yeah, so Acumen is a nonprofit impact investing fund. So we're a 501c3 and we receive charitable donations. And with those donations, we make debt and equity investments in social enterprises around the world. And so these are businesses that are providing goods and services to the poor at affordable rates. So some examples of our companies include D-Light, which is a solar lantern company. And so they're selling solar home products to low-income customers in Kenya. We have a clean cook stove company called Burn. Actually, it's another example in Kenya, but they're selling clean cook stoves to low-income consumers. We also have service companies, so a chain of sort of low-cost private health clinics. We have an ambulance company that's working in India and providing affordable ambulance care to low-income consumers. So that's just kind of a little bit of a background about what Acumen is and what we do. And so when we make investments in these companies, what we do is we evaluate it from a financial perspective, but we also believe strongly in evaluating its social impact potential. So whenever we look at a deal, there's sort of a framework that we follow. And then after we invest, we go back to that framework and really try to understand how is this investment performing against our framework. And so where I'll start is with Acumen's impact framework, which I believe is applicable not only in the social entrepreneurship and impact investing world, but also to a more general audience. So, how is it working? Oh, so you just, great. So we,
And then you can use this as well.
okay. Do you want to? Okay, cool. So we think about impact along 3 dimensions. So it's breadth, depth, and focus on the poor. So you'll see breadth is really a matter of scale. So how many lives does this company or this intervention have the potential to reach? So as you'll see, that's really a matter of scale. And then depth is that second element that we consider. And so that's really about what change will this intervention or this company bring to an end user's life? What is the meaningful change that is actually resulting in someone's life and household? And so we really think about impact primarily on a household level. And the last element that we consider is around poverty focus. So we really look at, okay, this company has scale, it's going to make a meaningful change in someone's life, but how many of their customers, do we really hypothesize are living below $2.50, which is our target market? So we want to try to reach as many of those consumers as we can, while also investing in a company that's going to be financially sustainable. And so up until now, we haven't necessarily had a way to measure how are we really performing against our impact framework. And so I think in the impact investing space, at least, when we're talking about impact measurement, we often talk in terms of these big flashy numbers, right? So kind of output measures. How many farmers has a company reached? How many students are attending schools? Or how many solar lanterns sold? And we rarely talk about, are these farmers really better off? Who are these children that are attending the schools? What's the effect of owning lanterns on kerosene usage? So really digging deeper to understand what has been the impact of this intervention. And so like I just said, until now, we haven't really had a way to measure this concretely. And I think the prevailing wisdom is that it's too hard, it's too expensive, it's slow, it's intrusive, it's burdensome, and quite frankly, I think a lot of people are or were saying, is it really worth it? I don't know if that's a message that resonates here in terms of impact measurement, but generally when you talk to folks in the private sector around M&E and monitoring and evaluation and impact measurement, there is a general sentiment that is this really worth it? And so what we're trying to do at Acumen is say, yes, it is worth it, but it's worth it because the landscape has changed. Most of our customers, or our company's customers, have access to mobile phones. They're connected, the world is more interconnected than ever, and the cost, the time, the availability, and the accessibility now of actually going and reaching those customers or those end users or the beneficiaries, whoever it is, of the projects that we're trying to implement is easier than ever. And so with that context, we've developed an approach that we're calling lean data. And really it has kind of 4 principles. Always put the customer first, so make our surveys and our efforts to measure impact as engaging and as enriching as possible for the end customers. Using low-cost technology, although recently we are moving away from just using mobile or just relying on, as you were saying, apps in general. And so another element is fast feedback loops and just using this data to make decisions. And so I think this next slide really captures what we're trying to achieve here. Oh, sorry, I don't know, not working, but basically,
You can do it. Try again.
I don't know, maybe, okay, you don't really necessarily need to know, but what this is, and I think what's most unique and what's most important to me about lean data and to my team is that it really represents a shift in mindset and a shift in accountability. And so it's away from kind of this top-down compliance, what data is important to the donors or to the investors or the limited partners, and really moving towards bottom-up customer accountability. What data will actually help the company? What data will actually help the customer? And then in turn, will help us understand our impact. So what I think we're doing is finding that intersection between sort of customer insights and customer feedback that will actually help the company make better decisions, be more accountable to those customers, and in turn help the customers, and data that will help Acumen and other foundations and agencies understand the actual impact that they're having. So in 2015, we surveyed around 6,800 customers, and we completed 12 lean data projects within our portfolio of companies. So we have about 50 active portfolio companies around the world. I should mention that we work in East Africa, West Africa, Pakistan, India, and Latin America. And then we actually just started an office in the US, so we'll also be investing in the US. And so it's general kind of more in-depth lean data projects cost about $25,000 per project. And that includes staff time, and that's all inclusive. And 4 weeks is the average project duration. And so to date, as I mentioned, we've completed projects through SMS, and we have various SMS survey providers that we work with, and I'm happy to share resources or lessons on that. Phone, so we have call centers that we use, that we commission, and we also have started training enumerators, so training people that will actually make phone calls in the language that is most relevant, and training people that have a background in trying to figure out exactly, how these companies are performing against our framework. And yeah, so SMS, phone, we've tried IVR, which is integrated voice response, and then what is our last? Yeah, we've done a few in-person interviews. So in 2016, we decided to push the limits a little bit and say, how far, how fast, at what quality of data can we get with lean data. And so just in the first 6 weeks of this year, it's a busy time, but we surveyed 5,000 customers across 18 lean data sprints, is what we were calling it, so more low-touch projects, so across 18 of our companies. And the total cost was around $10,000 per project, including staff time, and it took 6 weeks in total. So 18 companies, 6 weeks to complete all of this. And this was across 6 countries, 7 sectors, and 18 companies. And so what we're starting to get now is concrete data across our portfolio to tell us how are we performing against that impact framework that I talked to you about in the beginning. And so how many of you guys are familiar with the Progress Out of Poverty Index, the PPI tool? A few of you? Okay, great. It's a great tool. I recommend using it. And we rolled this out across 23 of our investees. And we found, so each bar represents the percent of customers that are living below $2.50 a day. And so we found that, on average, 57% of our customers are living below $2.50 a day. And you can see that, the portfolio with the highest poverty focus is our agriculture portfolio. And so next, I'll just talk a little bit about the Progress Out of Poverty tool, because the PPI tool has been incredibly useful for us, and a lot of foundations and other impact investors are just beginning now to use this. And I think that it represents a great opportunity to begin to start benchmarking. It's an incredibly accessible tool. And what it is a set of 10 questions, and it's amended by country. And it correlates to national census data. And it's a predictor of, an accurate predictor of likelihood to live below the poverty line. And so it can also be used to monitor progress. So for example, if before you start a project, you could use this as a baseline and conduct the PPI, and then sort of implement this every 6 months and start to see progress over time. But for Acumen and for us, what it really serves as is a tool to understand how well our companies are performing against that pillar that we talked about. And so secondly, I mentioned depth of impact. So how do you go about measuring a meaningful change, right? I think that that's the most difficult question that we've faced, and we'll still continue to confront this. And we've tried to develop at least one standardized question to ask across our portfolio to begin to understand depth of impact. And so the question that we've tested, it's such a simple question. I'm sure you're reading it like, oh, this is what's so special about this. But we've actually tested this across, like I said, 5,000 customers, 18 companies. And the question is, there have been changes in my life or home because of product or service. And it is based off of a methodology, which is the most significant change methodology that's kind of pervasive in M&E. And the answer options were strongly agree to strongly disagree. And we found that in some countries, the scale just didn't really work or didn't make sense. So we amended it a little bit. But in general, this is what we were hoping to achieve. And so you can see here that across our portfolio, these are the same companies, we're starting to get data on the percent of customers that strongly agree to experiencing positive changes. So the follow-up to the question is, were these changes negative or positive? And what I think, actually don't think I have the slide on it, but what I think is most useful actually about this question is the follow-up. And so after this question, we ask, what have been the most positive changes? And that's a completely open-ended question, but it's yielded some of the most interesting insights. I think the second question that also yielded really interesting insights was equally as simple, and it was, is there anything else you'd like to share? And so I think that that speaks to the simplicity of some of this, but also the level of insights that we're able to get from these questions, both through phone centers and also SMS. And so what we're doing is coding the answers that we're receiving to what have been the positive changes, and actually using those as the next step for us to understand the actual outcomes that we'd like to measure. So I think people always ask me, how do you select the metrics or the indicators that are most important? And this is a way that we're starting to do that. And as I said, we're putting the customer first, so we're really putting this in their hands to tell us what is the change that's most important to you. And I guess if I'll just go back really quickly to give you a little more information there. For our energy portfolio, the top themes that really come out are increased income, so savings on kerosene. One theme that's really interesting is phone charging. So a lot of customers mention phone charging as a benefit from their solar home systems. A lot of customers are also actually using their solar home systems to generate additional income by charging other people's phones. And lastly, in India in particular, it just represents a substitute or a complement to the grid. So when the electricity goes off in India, a lot of our customers are using solar as a complement to the grid, and also using it to save on their energy bills. Across agriculture, it's similar. We're seeing a lot, of customers mentioning increases in income and yield. So those are sort of the standard and obvious ones. But I just wanted to point those out, that those are kind of what we're seeing. And so what we're doing is also trying to combine poverty focus and depth. And so what this represents is depth of impact on the x-axis, so percentage of customers that agree to experiencing positive change. And then on the y-axis, it's the poverty profile. And so we're starting to see that there is a correlation between poverty profile and depth of impact. And so sectors with a higher poverty focus tend to have a more meaningful change on well-being. And so this is just very, very preliminary findings. But I think what this does, reinforces that some of these questions, this is quality data that we're getting back, and you can see that the customers themselves are able to articulate what the impact has been in their own words as well. And then it's kind of hard to see this. It doesn't really matter the actual words, but I just wanted to share here that this is part of a standardized survey that we've been sending out across these 18 companies. We amend it based on this, the company. But what I wanted to get across here is that the questions on the left, are useful for us, as I just mentioned, for those various reasons. But then on the right, there's additional value to this data for our companies, for the customers. It's, understanding usage patterns, relate this to value proposition. Obviously, that's very, very helpful for our companies to see. There have been changes in my home. That question I told you about gives us comparable data on the depth of impact, the strength of the value proposition. We can start to understand the outcomes that customers value most, the value proposition that's really, resonates most with customers. And then, as I said, is there anything else you'd like to share? We have received tons of valuable feedback. I forget the exact percentage, but I think around 60% of customers in our energy portfolio were actually responding with complaints about their systems. So I think that's a great illustration that these customers appreciate being heard and the opportunity to voice their feedback, and are actively reaching out with complaints, with suggestions, with ways that we're then finding opportunities to follow up on that. So this is an example of how one of the ways that we're presenting the data back to our companies. So what we've done is actually provided like a 30-page slide deck, and we go through it with them and really focus on how can this data lead to actions and better decisions. But this is just an example of a one-pager. So you can see the circles again, the breadth, depth, and poverty focus, who is the customer, favorite customer quotes. This is an example. You know, it saves charcoal and has no monoxide as before. I could not put it in the house because of the smoke and the carbon. Now I can comfortably use it at home. Anyway, so you can kind of read through those customer quotes there. And then lastly, I know this is more relevant kind of just in the context of impact investing and social entrepreneurship, but I did just think it was important to highlight what our companies are actually doing based on this data. Because I think in this context as well, when you're collecting data and it just sits in some spreadsheet or in some PowerPoint, but no one's actually using it to make better decisions, it's virtually useless, I think, in my mind. So what we've done is work with our companies to figure out, you know, what does this mean for you and your priorities, and how can you take action on it. So this is a company, Solar Now, in Uganda. They sell solar home systems. And what we found actually did a few surveys with Solar Now is 33% of their customers consistently report negative feedback about their solar home systems, whether it's a broken system or a part was missing, or you know, they keep calling the customer service representative, but they haven't visited. So that kept coming up. We did find that, you know, 49% of Solar Now's customers do live below $2.50 a day, which is promising that they're actually, you know, achieving their social mission that they're intending to. And so what they've done is, you know, they're setting up this customer insight engine to regularly, you know, follow up with their customers and gather data. They're setting up a, you know, two-way stream of communication with customers. They're making customer service an increased priority. They actually just hired a 7-person customer service team, which was great to see because they realized that this really was an area that they needed to improve. And so at the end of the day, it's made Solar Now more accountable to their end users, who's ultimately the lives that we're trying to change. And so secondly, this is a company in Pakistan, and it sells clean water to low-income consumers. And so our Lean Data survey highlighted the desire from customers for a brand that represents the health benefits, the quality, and the price. So when we were doing the survey with Pharmagen, they were about to launch their franchise shop. And their logo, which we got feedback from customers that, you know, it didn't feel fresh, it didn't feel healthy, it was sort of, I don't know. And so what we did was we worked with a design firm, and we quickly, within a week, commissioned them to help Pharmagen produce a logo that was more consistent and branding materials that was consistent with the qualitative feedback that we received in the survey. And so they just implemented this actually last week, and so we have yet to see the actual impact, but this was just an example of a company really taking this seriously. And then thirdly, Asoko is a company, they operate in Kenya and Ghana, and they work with smallholder farmers, and it's a text messaging system where they send information on crop prices, weather, yields to try to help smallholder farmers basically increase their crop yield. And so what the company did was actually use this data for internal and external communications. They produced an infographic, and really they identified, like Solar Now, areas for further investigation. And they found that their poverty focus was actually quite low. And this is a company that is really committed to reaching low-income consumers. And so, as you can see, I think, yeah, there's a quote from the CEO, but you know, they'd like to do more research to better understand the poverty profile of their farmers. And so, yeah, I think that was it for me. I wanted to keep this short so that I could take questions and really make this as relevant and useful for you guys. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Thanks very much, Ashley. That was really interesting. I think it took us through some of the real issues that we deal as a development organization implementing programs on the ground. This constant question: how do we best measure the impact? What do we go for? And of course, it's also timely, as a lot of our this is the time of the year where a lot of our country offices, we have 160 of them, they go through a process which is a planning process for the next 4 years. So they come to headquarters, they share with us a lot of their country program documents with a results framework in the back with certain indicators and so on. So it's timely in that some of us are involved in that process of vetting, and it's good food for thought in terms of what could be the alternatives, where should we be doing, perhaps in a lean way, and how do we move away from trying to, how many women do you reach with a particular gender-based violence program to something that really measures the impact. So it's very interesting. Let's maybe just throw it open from different experts here. And I think we'll take Francis first, because put your hand up. Very well placed to tell us about this. Thank you.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. That's great to hear. I've got a couple of questions. One, I was interested in the data. You said that you're collecting information about current customer characteristics that allows you to estimate the proportion that are in poverty. So just to find out a bit more about how you collect that data from customers. Are you using sample surveys? Is that maybe it's generally SMS, but are you, what's the kind of approach to that?
Yeah.
And also to the number of people that you think you're reaching, whether that is measured through the companies accurately or whether that's estimated.
Yeah, that's good.
The other aspect I'd be interested to hear about is it sounds like your model is largely around customers, so companies that have customers, and just to hear your thoughts on to what extent does this model depend on having customers as the unit that you're trying to track versus how well would it be applicable to other UNDP interventions that have got maybe more traditional beneficiaries from the development project?
Yeah. Great. So let me start.
Do you want to take maybe 3 questions and then we'll a couple of questions and then you can address them all?
Sure.
Is that okay?
All right.
Go ahead. So we'll take 2 questions, then we can take them in twos, okay?
Also for me, big thank you for this very inspiring presentation. And so I also teach development at CEPA here at Columbia University, and I'm always interested in conceptualize measuring impact. And as a researcher, I find, of course, these introductory questions little like, okay, I would like to get more depth.
Right.
So 2 questions. One, did you experiment with other measurements of depth than this?
Yeah.
How does it affect your life, and how can you share anything about other measurements? Again, and I can see the biggest value for me would be the elaborations of customers in the second one, right? What is the response rate? Because in my research shows that very few people actually take the time to give the answer. So you get some answers you can quote, you have in a result, but how representative these answers are, and that's a different question. So can you say something about that? Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I'll start with your first question, which is around the poverty focus and how are we actually collecting that data, right? So that's we get that through the Progress at a Poverty Index. So it's a PPI tool that was developed by the Acumen Foundation and Mark Schreiner, and he's an academic. And so basically what they did was they took census surveys and they came up with 10 of the strongest indicators that correlate most strongly with poverty, and they created basically, I think it's about 100 different surveys based on each country, and then a scorecard that actually you can use to calculate and come up with likelihood of living below the poverty line.
So are you undertaking surveys to use those indicators in order to map them?
Yeah.
And so sample-based surveys of the customers?
Yes. And so what we do is, we work with our companies to understand their customers' demographics. So a lot of these companies really don't have that level of detail on demographics, but we work with them to try to get a better understanding so that when we're sampling, we can get the most representative sample. And so we're using, for the poverty focus in particular, we're using that tool and that set of indicators and those questions and that relevant scorecard to come up with this percentage. Does that answer your first question?
Yeah, and I think you already said like the methods you're using, and some SMS, some phone surveys. So I guess that's just content. Yeah, so it's about 40% phone surveys, so call centers and trained researchers and enumerators, and about 30% SMS, and then the rest either IVR or in person. And we're doing a few RCTs, but
I am not directly involved with those. Those are more, well, I will be. I'm moving to Nairobi actually next month.
All right.
So I will be involved with the RCTs that we're doing, but to date, we've just done about 5 or 6 of them. And again, we're trying to see if we can kind of make this a little bit leaner. And so we're working on around $50,000 per project. But yeah, oh yeah, and then the second question was relevance, applying this not just from a customer perspective, but to beneficiaries. And I 100% can't underscore enough that yes, I think that the mindset shift that this represents is completely applicable to a place like the UN or a larger agency. And I think that just the idea of reaching out to end users and beneficiaries and customers and getting feedback and trying to get as much data as we can is definitely applicable. And so I think this brings me into my next point around response rates. And so that is an issue. I mean, I think that it's easier for us with our companies because they have established clear relationships with their customers. So when we reach out to them and say, we're reaching out on behalf of Solar Now or Company X, we've seen that dramatically increases response rates as opposed to when you're just reaching out and saying, hey, can you, answer 10 questions that I have and not providing any context. So that's one area where, you really have to provide that context, and it could even just be as simple as, you were part of this program that was trying to do X, Y, and Z. We want to hear your views and we want to hear your feedback. And we found that tons of qualitative responses, people saying, thank you for reaching out to get my feedback. Thank you for listening. And so I think that that's just an affirmation that people do want to respond. And so for response rates, it depends, it really depends. For phone surveys, they're pretty high. You have to be intentional. I mean, if it's a farmer, you can't reach them at certain points in the day, and you have to think about that and be strategic and think, when is the best time. In some cases, we've actually called and then, had to ask, when is a good time for us to call you back. For SMS, it depends. If it's, again, in Nigeria, we just did a survey there. The response rate was pretty low. It was about 6%. And I think that's because in Nigeria, there's a lot of cell kind of spam and messaging. But in Kenya, we've seen that response rates are generally over 15%. When we use a panel, so just as kind of SurveyMonkey in the US has a panel of respondents, we have a company that we work with called M-Survey, and they have a panel of over 15,000 Kenyans. They're also developing panels in Nigeria and a few other countries, I think the Philippines. So that's been great for kind of non-customer market research, understanding kind of how to use them as a comparison group. And when we do surveys with that group, its response rates are over 90%. So that is, and we have demographic information about that. But I think that there's, sorry, I'm rambling. There's one, well, I'll take a different question. Yeah, go for it.
I have many questions.
Okay.
I will
I don't know how to go through that.
Thank you for the presentation. First question, I think it would be interesting for us also to hear what is your definition of impact, because I think impact can be defined differently, and the way I see, the way you present, it's a bit different than how we would define impact in UNDP. It's still about change, but depends on level and scale, etc. That's why that would be interesting, what definition you use. Second, when you present plain numbers, it seems not very expensive. But on the other hand, if you compare the country, etc., so you approximately spend $10,000 for surveying 500 to 600 people in a developing country. I wonder if you compared it with face-to-face interviews and how much it is really cost-effective, especially considering the deviation of one survey compared to face-to-face survey. Did you do such a comparison, such analysis of effectiveness of the method? The other question is marginalized group and specifically women, because in general, in phone surveys, women are among the group which are more difficult to access, especially in developing countries, because they are less likely to have a phone or to have free access to their phone. How do you address that issue? Do you collect demographics? How do you make sure that those groups are addressed and heard as well? Thanks.
Great. So yeah, I mean, I'd also really be curious to hear how you guys or UNDP defines impact and sort of the different layers that you take into consideration. But we can let you guys do that after. Yeah, so I think that, as I said, we think about impact along those 3 dimensions, and really what we're trying to ascertain or what we're trying to better understand is the change in household well-being. So at this point, we're really not taking into account sort of externalities or kind of ESG, environmental and social governance. We're not as focused on that right now. I think that as our measurement approaches continue to evolve, and as we start, developing a little bit more rigor, I think we will start to want to understand those more detailed elements of impact. But right now, it's really around what is the meaningful change that is occurring to an end user's well-being, and it's around depth of impact. And so we haven't yet really begun to measure the actual outcomes. So other than customer reported data on change in income, how is this really changing somebody's income? But that's kind of what we're hoping to do next and starting to get there. And have active kind of projects to really figure out how can we take this to the next level to start to understand outcomes as well. And yeah, so the question around cost, I mean, I would say that if you're comparing this to a traditional RCT, the cost savings and the time savings are just tremendously huge. I think it's the difference between $7,000 to $10,000 and around $150,000 if you take into account staff time and the project duration, et cetera. And so we do have these trained researchers that have actually now joined our staff, and we're experimenting now with in-person surveys. So I don't have the exact number for you right now on the cost for the in-person surveys, but yeah, I would say that it's probably not too different. I don't think that with in-person we'd be able to survey the same number of people, so I don't think we'd be able to get samples of around 300 and 400, which is what we've been getting. So I think we just have to make a few trade-offs there. But yeah, I would say that if you're comparing it to RCTs, then this is definitely less expensive. And yeah, your last point around marginalized customers, I think that's huge. That's very important. And as I said, with the panel that we use, they are kind of tracking demographics, and so we do see a 50-50 split between men and women. It does tend to be a little bit younger of an audience because, I think older people are not necessarily as literate. But actually what we found is interesting is that if it is someone that's, maybe over the age of 60 or whatever, they have a younger person in the room or who they're with help them fill out the survey or answer the questions. But with a lot of our customers or companies, a lot of the respondents that we've been getting have been male. So it's definitely dependent. I mean, some of our sanitation companies are primarily female, and we are hearing from them. But that's definitely a priority for us, is to figure out when companies don't have a really good understanding of their demographics, and we're finding that 80% of the respondents are male, we need to dig deeper to understand, is that because 80% of your customers are male, or is that, that it's just the men that are answering?
Thank you very much for the presentation. A part of what my group does at UNDP is we help countries develop emission reduction targets for greenhouse gas IPCCs, and we help countries design the climate change mitigation projects to help implement the targets. And M&E or MRV is a big component of what potential donors are looking for. Is there some sort of tool or knowledge product that you could recommend that either Acumen has, anticipated to develop in the future, or if there's another resource that you can recommend that we can kind of pass along to our country partners? Because it's kind of like reinventing the wheel every single time.
A tool or resource in like a survey provider,
this is what's being done to develop an effective M&E system. This is what works, what doesn't work. Some questions that are good. Avoid these things.
Yeah.
It's kind of a new area for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're starting to combine our question sets, and we're working with the company. It's actually a survey company, M-Survey, that I mentioned, to thoroughly test all of these questions, also with a non-customers, so general population panels, and just get a higher degree of confidence in the accuracy of responses. So this involves constantly rephrasing questions and answer choices and making sure that they're understood across a broad range of audiences. And so in the next few months, we're going to start to put out question sets and tools and resources. And so I think that will be most helpful just in terms of the questions that are asked. And we do have a few other resources in terms of the companies that we're actually working with, how to train enumerators in kind of a lean way, in terms of creating almost your own call center. So yeah, we'll start to.
Thank you. Just a very quick question myself, and it's more about the role of Acumen as a funding entity, as a fund. Because I guess if I was to look at it sort of from the outside perspective, what you're doing here, you're trying to help those you fund. You're trying to help them be better at what they do, be more impactful. Your end goal is for them to be sustainable companies that provide real services, that hire employees, they create economies. So to what extent do you use this lean data to then, as a metrics, to then decide on to inform your funding decisions? When do you stop the funding? When do you provide more? Do you build these costs into the grant you give them or the initial funding, or is this something you kind of have on the side as your support structure, if you will?
Yeah.
Because that, to me, that's the accountability side of the recipient, which is relevant, I think, to the work that we do to some extent as a measurement tool, as a performance element to it.
Right. Great questions. Yeah. So we started lean data around pretty much last year is when we really went in full force, and then this year. And so as you can imagine, as this is growing, we're starting to ask those exact questions. So now that we have data for the first time that we're beginning to analyze across companies and across countries, how do we then use this to make decisions ourselves as investors? And so what we just did, put together this 500-page crazy slide deck, but it was an attempt to aggregate all of this data that we've collected over the past 2 years and start to come up with kind of sector-level insights about what we believe is working, where, and why. And that's based on qualitative feedback. So that's one example of how we're now starting to analyze this data at a higher level and think through how it informs our strategy moving forward. And secondly, from within our portfolio, what we're now starting to do is offer kind of these sprint projects, so the really low touch, low cost projects to all of our companies in the first 100 days, and have that be tied to kind of the term sheet that we, the agreement or the investment agreement. So I think what that serves as is a baseline kind of level for us to understand where this company is at, where they can improve. But I think, we're still working out what happens if we find that, this is a really low impact company. Do we pull out funding? No, so what do we do? But what we're trying to share with our companies is say, if you ask people for feedback, you almost have a responsibility to then act on it. And so then it becomes our responsibility to work with our companies to figure out, okay, 30% of your customers are complaining. Let's actually try to do something about that. So we haven't yet gotten to a point where we've.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
We have. Let me jump in because it's near that angle, as the Germans say. Sunita said. We have a question from UNICEF. You have a question, right? Yes. You have a question online. Anyone else has questions? I'm just time conscious. as hardly anyone brings lunches to those brown bag lunches, and I'm sure you're all hungry. All right.
Definitely take my email address.
Then we'll take these
and
3
reach out
questions.
as well.
Do you want to go?
My name's Lisa. We just launched our own venture fund weeks ago.
Great.
It's very interesting to see kind of how you're going about
Yeah.
data. So a couple of questions. You mentioned quick feedback loops. So I was just wondering how you're seeing this kind of data collection tool working with kind of iteration and rapid feedback. So is it looking at the costs? Do you see some of your companies doing this on an ongoing basis? And potentially, maybe doing SMS or phone campaigns very regularly to iterate products. And how does that relate to the stage that the company's at? So do you have, I'm not sure if you focus on scale only or if you invest in early stage companies, did you see anything that was different there? The kind of data that was useful and how you were able to collect that? And just taking a step back, how did you get the customer data? So do people opt in with their private information when they kind of buy a product? Or that's a database that you can present some other way? Coming back to the question on response rates, I think that's something that we've seen with SMS-based tools, is that when it's an opt-in system, and people get something back regularly, that they're much more likely to respond when you ask them for something. So just out of curiosity how that works.
Do we want to do that?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the presentation. I personally experimented the human-centered design in the LDP, Leadership Development Pathway, and I found it a little bit time-consuming, even if we choose as a team like the simplest or the easiest subject among the subjects we had. So I wonder, like today, for example, in our cluster, we had a meeting and we were discussing emergency development context and how we have to answer quickly. So for this human-centered design and these surveys, etc., it's really like from the assessment to prototyping. We need also to test. We need to change a little bit after testing. So it's not really emergency-based. Do you have any emergency tools, or I say tools, you can use in emergency context?
That's great. We haven't really thought about that because it's not directly applicable to what we're trying to do. But I think as much as we can try to package, as I said, our question sets and kind of survey providers and tools, is where we'll start to get to a point where this can be kind of rapidly deployed. I mean, for us, we're now at the point where we could in a second sort of send out a survey to, this M-Surveys panel in literally seconds, or we could kind of call upon our researchers to survey kind of a population panel. I mean, it's obviously dependent on having customer phone numbers.
Yeah,
which is
they have access.
Yeah, which is if they have access to it. Yeah, exactly. Which is tough and definitely in an emergency context, definitely not 100% relevant. But I think we've iterated enough and we've formed enough partnerships with different kind of providers at this stage where, it's pretty quick for us. But yeah, we haven't necessarily thought through for others.
And Ashley, we have a question online that is related to the UNICEF question. If you're going to go to that next, I'm sorry. So the question is from Ana Carolina Machado, and she wants to know how the beneficiaries or clients are selected for these projects, and do lean data surveys offer inputs for better targeting mechanisms? So related to the earlier question.
Okay, great. Yeah, how do we select customers, you're saying?
So I think it goes more towards the the clients, beneficiaries that are part of these projects.
Right.
So is there any special way that you guys are selecting them? And then also as far as the lean data surveys, what kind of inputs there are?
So, okay, I'm conscious of time, so I'll go through kind of quickly, but definitely happy to follow up with anyone after. So in terms of how do we select beneficiaries or customers, obviously, like I just said, this is dependent on a company having phone numbers. So if a company does have phone numbers, customer phone numbers, what we do is we have them send us their entire database. If they have any demographic information, we get that as well. Oftentimes, they don't, and so we ask for kind of a general sense of, what percentage female, male, age, so that we can try to get as representative of the sample as we can. And then we go from there. If a company doesn't have phone numbers, which sometimes is the case, there are various creative ways to help a company get that. So it's on new products, putting kind of like an SMS short code on the product, so someone can text and respond. If it's a program, trying to kind of build that into it a little bit more, so that you have ways in the future to get phone numbers. So I'm happy to provide more examples about how you could help an intervention or a company implement one of those SMS short codes. In terms of the stage of company question, I think, yeah, we've seen, so we invest sort of Series A funding, and we've seen that the companies that are more evolved do tend to have sort of their own customer feedback or customer insight team, or at least are trying to get feedback from their customers. But again, I would say that that's rare, because as a social enterprise, you're sort of cash-strapped, resource-constrained, and this is not necessarily a company's first priority, when in reality, I think it's such a useful way to get information about the product. So I would say, yeah, there's definitely going to be variations on the questions that you ask, and the level to which you go about this, depending on a company stage, how much information they already have about their customers, and whether or not they've done these types of surveys in the past. I mean, a lot of our companies have, which I don't think is directly relevant for everyone, but have an MIS system. So one of our companies is Paga. It's a financial inclusion company. They do mobile money. What?
What's an
MIS? Oh, information system. Yeah. Sorry, yeah. So anyway, they have a ton of data, and so it's really just thinking through how to use that more effectively. And yeah, I think in terms of feedback loops, a lot of our companies now, after seeing how easy it is to get feedback in real time, are setting up sort of channels of communication with their customers, customer kind of service, programs. There's now various companies that are coming out and providing kind of mobile solutions to, creating these channels for communication. So definitely seeing that people are iterating, as I mentioned with Pharmagen, changing their logo based on feedback really quickly, and starting to incorporate this in the way that they operate. So I know that wasn't super detailed, but yeah, happy to provide more context. Great.
All right.
Anyone else?
Then before closing, I just want to say I don't have answers for both of you, but offers. I would like, USA recently ran an open innovation challenge. They asked bright organizations out there, what are good ways for M&E for innovations? And received interesting proposals, chose 4 that they're now supporting. And they have a variety of methods. It's not a finished knowledge product, but it's fresh attempts to M&E, in my opinion, that they're looking for clients for. So we'll talk, and I'll send you that. It's really interesting offers. Unfortunately, not free of cost, but promising approaches. And I also don't have an answer to you. In our portfolio, like, we provide seed funding to country offices to test new ways of working. And a lot of it has emergency response components, but not an M&E focus. But at the World Humanitarian Summit, there will be a global alliance for humanitarian innovation announced, and it brings together the humanitarian players, but also us. And we sit at that table, and if people in UNDP have such questions, we will look if such models exist, and if not, if this alliance can make investments in coming up. But yeah, always if you have questions, we don't always have answers, but we are very happy to broker relationships and look for the right partners to innovate around it. So, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.